It was the kind of warm, uneasy Monday that people in southeast Texas know too well, the kind that feels strangely heavy for late November, even on the eve of Thanksgiving week. The sky had carried a muted tension since early morning, with low clouds drifting fast across the horizon, as if pushed by hands you couldn't see. By noon on the 24th of November 2025, residents across Harris County, from the edges of spring to the outer loops of Houston, were already watching the radar on their phones. A cold front was tumbling in from the northwest, meeting a pocket of warm Gulf moisture that had settled over the region for days. Storm warnings weren't unusual, but there was something different about the atmosphere, something brittle, restless. Many described the air as feeling electrically charged. The first rumbles of thunder came long before the rain. In neighborhoods west of Interstate 45, reports of sharp lightning bolts and sudden gusts of wind circulated through group chats and community apps. Parents picking their children up from school noticed the sky gradually darkening, even though the forecast had predicted only scattered storms earlier in the day. But by early afternoon, meteorologists began updating the advisory, and a statewide tornado watch swept across Texas, stretching from the coast to the pine forests in the northeast. Harris, Montgomery, Waller, Brazos, and Fort Bend counties all fell under the expanding alert zone. Around 1:30 p.m. the atmosphere seemed to pivot. Residents described seeing clouds suddenly rotating overhead, forming loose spirals that tightened as the wind shifted. In the Cypress and Klein areas, dogs began barking wildly, and backyard wind chimes snapped violently, clanging against each other in the rising gusts. People looked up from their cars at stoplights to see a darkening mass crawling across the sky, trailing wisps of vapor that curled back into the parent storm like grasping hands. Videos later posted by residents captured the eerie moment when the swirling formation descended, and the first, faint suggestion of a funnel cloud began to take shape high above State Highway 249. By 1:38 p.m. according to emergency officials, the funnel touched the ground. What began as a thin, rope-like structure quickly expanded into a thick, low-hanging vortex, dragging debris upward as it strengthened. Witnesses near the highway described the tornado's birth as both silent and explosive. For some, it emerged so suddenly they barely had time to react. One driver pulled off the road because the trees around her bent nearly horizontal. Another man, standing on his porch in spring, recorded the swirling column as it widened and carved a clear, violent path directly toward the residential streets ahead. In less than a minute, the tornado intensified, roaring across backyards and smashing into rows of homes with a force residents later said came out of nowhere. The neighborhoods near Memorial Northwest were among the first hit. Garage doors peeled away like foil, roof shingles tore loose in waves, and fences disintegrated as wooden slats became airborne. Windows imploded inward, scattering glass across living rooms and kitchens. One family reported the sound as resembling a train running straight through the house, a description echoed by many who witnessed the storm's path that afternoon. Emergency scanners across Harris County crackled to life as deputies, firefighters, and rescue crews mobilized. Harris County Constable Mark Herman reported that his deputies were rushing toward the affected neighborhoods, calling in damage assessments as they spotted torn-off rooftops and shredded trees blocking roads. The tornado, still moving northeast at an estimated 25 to 30 miles per hour, cut a jagged line across subdivisions in Klein and Spring, snapping power poles and dragging insulation, roofing, and tree limbs into chaotic spirals that trailed hundreds of feet into the sky. Videos circulating on social media captured scenes that neighbors described as surreal. In one clip, the funnel loomed beyond a row of houses, its base swirling with branches, shingles, and pieces of fencing. The sky behind it glowed an unsettling shade of greenish-gray, a color many Texans instantly recognized as the signature of a violent storm. People could be heard shouting for their families to take shelter, while others filmed from windows, their voices trembling as the tornado carved deeper into the neighborhood. One video posted by a man named Grayson Moore showed the tornado crossing near Highway 249, its form wide and dense, kicking up sheets of debris. He filmed from inside his vehicle as the funnel drifted across the horizon before plunging toward homes further east. His voice shook as he narrated, at times falling silent when the wind suddenly rattled his car and leaves slapped against the windshield. Other residents captured footage showing the storm ripping apart garages, tearing large chunks from rooftops, and toppling trees that had stood in place for decades. Within minutes, Reports confirmed that over 100 homes were damaged, some severely. While several structures were missing entire roof sections, others had exterior walls caved in, insulation scattered through yards like snow, and vehicles crushed beneath collapsed garages. Despite the extraordinary destruction, officials announced that early search efforts indicated no fatalities and no life-threatening injuries, a fact many would later describe as miraculous. Yet the tornado's destruction wasn't limited to residential neighborhoods. As the storm continued northeast, it crossed paths with the Harris County Emergency Services campus, where the maintenance building took a direct hit. Winds ripped away the roof and tore down the back wall, scattering tools and equipment into the open field behind it. Large, thick-trunked trees snapped in half as if made of cardboard. Emergency personnel on site described hearing a rising howl moments before the structure gave way. 2 maintenance employees had been inside the building at the time, but according to officials, both escaped without major injuries. By late afternoon, the storm system continued to pulse across the region, producing additional thunderstorms and prompting the National Weather Service (NWS) to extend tornado watches and warnings into the evening. Weather spotters reported funnel clouds near Willowbrook, Jersey Village, and Hooks Airport, confirming that several supercells were active simultaneously across the Houston metro area. Communities including the Woodlands, Oak Ridge North, Shenandoah, Chateau Woods, and Porter Heights were all placed under rotating sequences of warnings between 1:38 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. with residents urged repeatedly to seek shelter away from windows and low-lying structures. Emergency crews worked through broken streets, maneuvering around fallen trees and down power lines to reach homes where families were trapped inside by debris. Firefighters from Cyfair and Klein posted updates showing scenes of destruction, shattered windows littering driveways, fences torn apart, power poles splintered, and fragments of buildings scattered across lawns. Despite the chaotic environment, first responders conducted door-to-door checks to ensure that no one was trapped beneath collapsed structures. Throughout the afternoon and evening, the strong cold front continued pushing storms across the county. Meteorologists explained that the atmospheric instability had been building since morning due to the collision of warm Gulf moisture with upper-level winds that were unusually strong for the season. The wind shear differences in wind speed and direction at various altitudes created conditions ripe for rotating thunderstorms, known as supercells. These types of storms are the primary producers of tornadoes, and on this day, several cells developed the rotation needed to spawn them. As night approached, the community emerged from shelters, stunned by the damage that had unfolded in such a short period. The tornado's path, while not long, was dense with destruction. Entire blocks bore the scars of the storm, twisted metal, shredded trees, and roofs with gaping holes where the winds had torn through. Residents walked slowly through their streets, many filming the scenes to send to family members who had taken shelter elsewhere in the county. People spoke quietly, processing what they had just experienced. One woman stood outside the remains of her garage, holding a broken bicycle frame that she recognized as her son's. Another man stared at a tree that had crashed through his kitchen ceiling, shaking his head in disbelief. Neighbors helped each other gather debris, covering exposed roofs with tarps as best they could while waiting for emergency crews to arrive. Volunteers distributed water and blankets, and community associations organized temporary shelters for families whose homes were too damaged to stay in overnight. Although power outages affected large portions of northwest Harris County, residents leaned on one another as they began to assess the full extent of the damage. Local officials held briefings throughout the evening, emphasizing the importance of staying indoors as more storms approached. Roads were blocked off to allow crews to clear fallen trees and restore power lines. Though there were no reports of fatalities, the emotional weight of the event weighed heavily on the community. Many expressed gratitude for their safety while also grappling with the shock of seeing their homes and neighborhoods transformed in a matter of minutes. Meteorologists from NWS stated that they would need additional time to survey the tornado's track and intensity before assigning an official F rating, which measures tornado strength based on the damage observed. Survey teams plan to inspect the affected areas at first daylight, documenting structural damage and examining patterns in tree destruction to determine the storm's strength. Early speculation suggested the tornado could fall within the lower end of the enhanced Fujita scale, given the scale of roof damage and snap trees, but no official classification had yet been released. As midnight approached, The remaining storms drifted eastward, leaving behind a patchwork of clearing skies and quiet streets. But the silence felt unnatural, almost fragile, as if the environment itself was recovering from the chaos of the afternoon. The days following the tornado would bring insurance inspections, repair crews, and long efforts to restore normalcy. But on that night, the people of Harris County focused on what mattered most: the relief that despite the destructive power of the storm, their community had survived, shaken but unbroken. As the last of the storm clouds drifted away over Harris County, the full scale of the devastation slowly came into focus. Emergency crews continued moving door to door long after night had fallen, checking homes, clearing debris, and ensuring no residents remained trapped behind collapsed walls or under shattered roofs. Houston's northern suburbs, Spring, Klein, Cypress, and several unincorporated neighborhoods woke to a morning that felt unfamiliar, as if the storm had rewritten the entire landscape overnight. Residents stepped outside to find their streets transformed into labyrinths of twisted fences, mangled trees, and ripped-off shingles scattered like confetti along the sidewalks. What had been ordinary routines the day before, taking children to school, commuting to work, walking dogs in the quiet morning air, were suddenly replaced by the harsh reality of